Yenneker knew something wasn't right the moment she read Ed's note. It felt like he was trying to keep her out of something big, something dangerous. She'd been sitting alone in the rose garden, worrying over a broken hair clip while he was here, fighting desperately in Ophelis Hall. Her fingers clenched around the clip until it cracked in her palm. She marched into the hall and demanded to know what was going on. Taylor glanced back, clearly surprised to see her. He admitted he was glad she'd come. Ophelis Hall had been overrun by angry students. But before he could explain more, Elvira stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. She told Taylor to take a closer look at Yenneker's aura. Yenneker was the enemy. The ground trembled under her feet as she approached. Each step added weight to the pressure already choking the room. Ed shouted, an attempt to stop her, but she ignored it. She gave him a soft, almost gentle smile, then promised she'd handle everything. The atmosphere shifted in an instant. Windows shattered as Yenneker summoned her full force. Spirits of every element flooded the room. Mid-rank, low-rank, fluid spirits, an entire army responding to her call. Elvira gasped, recognizing the scale of the summoning. No one could win against this. She shouted at Taylor to fall back. They didn't stand a chance. They'd barely managed to deal with Ed. Yenneker was on another level entirely. Taylor hesitated as he faced Yenneker with his sword drawn. He wasn't one to back down. The spirits closed in and readied their attack. Suddenly, Ed grabbed him by the collar from behind and threw him toward the stairs. Ed's interjection pulled him away from Yenneker's attack at the last minute. Taylor landed hard, dazed. Looking up, he saw Ed standing between him and the spirits. Ed told him to move, get to the second floor. He'd handle Yenneker. Ayla rushed to his side, clearly confused. Ed had been trying to stop them. Why help them now? Elvira gave a weak, uncertain laugh. He couldn't stop all those spirits. It was impossible. Then something hit her in the head. Ed tossed her reagent bag back toward her and apologized for slicing the strap earlier. Still rattled, she fumbled for it. She asked him what he thought he was doing, ordering her around like that. But she didn't argue. She followed Taylor and Ayla up the stairs. Ed started walking toward Yenneker. Yenneker, surprised, asked him to step aside while she took care of things. He could explain the situation later while she treated his wounds. Ed raised his hands and placed them gently on her shoulders, telling her he was fine. She froze, clearly flustered, as she realized Ed's hands were on her shoulders. He asked her to please dismiss the spirits. He was having trouble staying upright with all the wind swirling around them. Yenneker apologized and released them. The pressure in the room vanished, the air settling back into stillness. On the stairs, the others turned around. They froze mid-step. Elvira stared. He'd actually stopped her. Ed turned slightly and waved them off, then collapsed. A few minutes later, Ed was propped up against the wall, still trying to catch his breath. Yenneker sat beside him, watching quietly. Then she asked why he kept doing this, why he always let himself get hurt like this. She reminded him that he didn't have to carry everything alone. He could rely on her. Ed gave a tired smile. He said he had his reasons, and that he'd explain them, just not right now. Yenneker muttered that they went too far. They didn't have to beat him up that badly. She said she'd give them a piece of her mind the next time she saw them. Then she glanced back at him and made him promise, no more of this. No more getting hurt like this. Ed thanked her for worrying. Then he thought to himself that his role here was done. He'd done what he could. It was time to head back to camp. Then Yenneker mentioned something. While waiting earlier in the rose garden, she'd noticed something strange. A carriage had passed by. She hadn't thought much of it at first until she noticed the golden crown on the roof. Ed's eyes widened. A golden crown? That wasn't just any carriage. That was the symbol of the Elt Company's head, the Golden King. Lortel's adoptive father, the man who had murdered her real parents, the one who, in the second act of the story, would eventually be defeated by Lortel in a power struggle for the sage's sealed tome, then disappear from the narrative altogether. He had no reason to be here now, but he was. and far too early. The story was changing, and Ed wasn't prepared for it. From the 5th floor window of Ophelis Hall, Lortel looked down at the carriage parked outside. She tapped her nails against the sill and sighed. Elris stood quietly beside her. Lortel said she'd been rejected by the boy who looked so obviously evil and wicked. Elris raised an eyebrow. Did she mean Master Ed? Then she added that he didn't seem like Lortel's type. Lortel gave a faint smile. He wasn't bad looking, but that wasn't it. She thought they were alike, both willing to do whatever it took to survive, just like her and Elris. She sighed again. People like them would probably face rejection for the rest of their lives. Elris remained silent. She had spent over 20 years at Ophelis Hall, starting her training at just 15 and quickly rising to become head maid at a remarkably young age. Lortel had spent a fortune to win her loyalty, believing every coin was worth it. Because Elris was someone like herself, someone who had sacrificed values and ideals for wealth. Only people like herself could ease the loneliness she felt. Growing up in the slums, Lortel learned one rule: trust no one, or you'll be betrayed. That was the harsh reality she had to live with. As they walked through the halls, Lortel told her everything was going to plan. All she had to do now was hide in a storage room and play the role of a frightened student who ran and hid when things got too dangerous. Elris sighed, then drew her sword. Lortel froze as the cold blade touched the side of her neck. Elris's voice was quiet but clear. They were nothing alike. On the 2nd floor, Taylor's group had finally caught up with Clevius. After some resistance and a bit of force, they managed to drag him along as an unwilling ally. With his reluctant help, they cleared the 3rd floor, defeating the maid posted there with little difficulty. Then they reached the 4th floor. Only the 1st floor boss, Ed, had truly slowed them down. The deeper they moved into Ophelis Hall, the worse the atmosphere became. Something was wrong. The air vibrated with unstable mana. Students ran past them in a panic, some tripping over each other, others screaming. Then they saw him. Willen stood at the far end of the hall, surrounded by a storm of violent magical energy. Arcs of power pulsed around him, scorching the walls. His arms trembled as he tried to contain the power surging through his body. He shouted at them for help. He couldn't control it anymore. This had been part of the plan all along for Willen, but things were spiralling out of control. The students were at risk, some even jumping from windows to escape. Taylor deflected a burst of energy with his sword and shouted to Elvira. Did she have any of the mana-blocking powder left? She shook her head. She told him it wouldn't work. While it disrupted mana, it couldn't affect the magic circles that now consumed Willen. Instead, she dug into her reagents and pulled out a potion. An anglerfish potion. She uncorked it and poured its glowing contents across the floor. It shimmered, then spread like mist across the corridor. A barrier formed, a thin but sturdy wall that would shield them and the students behind them from weaker magical attacks. With the backline protected, she grabbed Clevius and kicked him through the barrier toward Willen. She ordered Taylor and Clevius to go and knock Willen out. Clevius stumbled forward toward the storm. Taylor followed immediately. They sprinted through the hallway, bouncing off walls and dodging exploding chunks of debris, making their way toward the source of the chaos. The closer they got, the more intense the pressure became. Finally, they reached Willen. He gave a shaky laugh of relief. Then, all the windows of Ophelis Hall exploded on the 4th floor. Taylor and Clevius managed to defeat Willen. Outside, Ed watched the carriage from the edge of the trees, staying hidden as the windows exploded. Yenneker asked if he should move, but Ed said he was okay despite his injuries. The carriage had been sitting there for a while, but no one had come out yet. Ed wondered why a man like the Golden King would arrive under the cover of darkness in such a plain carriage. On any other day, he'd arrive with a flashy parade, but this quiet arrival meant he didn't want anyone to know he was here. Ed thought the Golden King shouldn't be here yet, so what had changed? What was he up to? Then a maid stepped toward the carriage, holding an umbrella. He recognised her instantly. Shani. One of the maids of Ophelis Hall, an orphan, raised under Elris's care. She should have been upstairs with her twin sister. Ed's chest tightened. Shani would never betray Elris, which could only mean Elris had betrayed Lortel. The plan was falling apart. Smoke residue still hung in the air as Elta finally stepped through the entrance of Ophelis Hall. Flanked by cloaked men, he walked with quiet purpose. No fanfare, no grand entrance, just deliberate silence and cold authority. Left behind in the carriage was the charred remnant of a note, still faintly smouldering. The letter had exposed everything: Lortel's betrayal, her knowledge of her parents' murder, her hidden alliances with rival merchants and rogue executives from within the Elty company. Her quiet bid to weaken his control by targeting the sage's sealed tome and creating a scandal large enough to draw attention from the main branch. The sender promised they had proof, and they were willing to sell it. It was Elris. Meanwhile, Elris, still holding her sword at Lortel's neck, pondered her choices. She needed the money now more than ever. Her eyesight was failing, and she had lost some of her hearing due to a past accident. Her time as headmaid was nearing its end. She had many people depending on her, and managed several orphanages, and was worried what would happen if she could no longer work. She told Lortel that she thought she was more clever than this, that a little speech about revenge hadn't moved her at all. In the end, both Elta and Lortel were the same. Then Elris sighed, realising she had become just like them too. Then the door exploded open. Taylor's group stormed in. Elvira saw the situation and shouted that the maid had taken a hostage. Elris, surprised, pointed her sword toward the group as Lortel fell forward the moment the blade left her neck. The group rushed to her as Taylor stood guard facing Elris. Lortel couldn't bring herself to speak. She thought she'd be able to say it, that Elris was the one behind this, that she'd betrayed her. But now, with the lump in her throat and tears slipping past her eyes, she could barely breathe. Elvira knelt beside her, stunned. She had never seen Lortel like this, so shaken, so human. What happened to her? Lortel thought she must look pathetic. She wiped tears from her face and ran down the stairs, covering her face. As she ran, she thought of Elta's arrival. Her plan to take him down was almost complete. The years of tax evasion and bribery were finally going to be exposed. All she had to do now was send a message to one of the executives at the main branch while Elta was away. She had a carrier pigeon in her room. She just had to get there, send the message, hide, and avoid capture. Then she slowed to a stop. She was prepared for betrayal. She'd experienced it countless times. So why was she breaking down like this? Her face was covered in tears, her body shaking. She composed herself and told herself that she just needed to make it through the night. As long as she could get that message out, she would be fine. Meanwhile, at the entrance of Ophelis Hall, Elta walked in through the main entrance, surrounded by his men, all wearing hooded cloaks. He stopped when he saw someone standing in front of the stairs. Ed was there, blocking the way. Elta told him he should evacuate with the other students. Ed calmly replied that he was here to stop anyone from entering the building. The explosions had made it dangerous. It could collapse at any moment. So until the academy staff arrived, he was keeping everyone out. Elta asked if the academy had instructed him to do this. Ed explained that he was acting on his own judgment, following standard protocol. He thought to himself that maybe he should have gone upstairs to help Lortel, but no, Taylor was up there. He should be able to reach her. Ed had faith in them. He knew they could do it. He'd seen it before when playing the game. He just needed to hold these men back. He couldn't let them reach Lortel. Then he acted like he'd just recognised Elta, politely asking if he was Master Elta Kehaland, the head of the Elta company. He bowed, showing respect, and suggested contacting the academy so Elta could receive a proper welcome. Elta stared down at him, eyes narrowing slightly. With a faint curl of his lip, he remarked that Ed must be working for Lortel. 10 minutes ago, Ed and Yenneker blew up the wall of Zig's dorm and found him mid-workout doing vertical push-ups. Ed asked why he hadn't fled with the others. Ziggs replied a collapsed building wouldn't kill him. Only a monster would think that, Ed thought. Zig stood up and asked why Ed had just destroyed his wall, complaining that the hole would let the draft in. Ed wondered who would think this musclehead was a mage. Ziggs introduced himself politely to Yenneker, since they'd never spoken before, and apologised for the glass can incident. Yenneker tried to say it was her fault, but Ed interrupted, telling her not to apologise since she'd already been punished. Yenneker nervously thanked Ed. Ziggs looked at them both and asked if they were dating. Yenneker jumped, denying it in shock. She glanced at Ed, who just stared at her. She wondered if she'd hurt his feelings by denying it so strongly. Ed told her not to worry, that Ziggs was the rude one. Ziggs bowed and apologised, then asked what brought them here. Ed said he needed a favour and would owe Ziggs one if he could help. Back to the present, Ed was still speaking with Elta at the entrance of Ophelis Hall, pretending to offer him a proper reception while Ziggs and Yenneker watched from the shadows. Elta narrowed his eyes, his suspicion growing. He leaned in slightly and asked if Ed had been charmed by Lortel's looks. A girl like her couldn't be trusted. She'd stab him in the back the moment he became useless. Then he made an offer, double whatever Lortel had promised him, if he would just step aside. Ed raised his head and replied calmly. He hadn't taken any payment from Lortel, so double of nothing was still nothing. Elta didn't like that answer. He raised a hand. All at once, the cloaked men around him unsheathed their swords. He gave the order to remove Ed quietly. Ed turned and ran, but more of them stepped in to block his path. A sudden gust of wind roared through the entrance, scattering the men. Nearby, Zig stood with one arm outstretched, having cast Wind Slash. Yenneker stood beside him, tense but ready. Ed called out to them, just hold the line and buy him some time. He'd owe them. Both Ziggs and Yenneker stepped forward, standing between the cloaked men and the stairs. As Ed ran up to the next floor, Ziggs shouted that he already owed him anyway. Elta's expression darkened. He warned his men not to underestimate the students. They might be young, but they weren't weak. With weapons drawn, they charged towards Ziggs and Yenneker. Ed ran up the stairs, his mind focused on one thing: finding Lortel. She had to know what was happening. Elta was here, and she was the target. He rushed through the winding corridors of Ophelis Hall until finally he spotted her hiding. He asked if she was all right, then motioned for her to follow him. They had no time to waste. Lortel ran behind him, but thoughts were swirling in her head. People always wanted something. No one ever helped without expecting something in return. That was the truth she'd grown up with. That was why she trusted Elris. And that was why betrayal hurt so much. She remembered the look Yenneker gave Ed once, a kind of affection that seemed so selfless, so genuine. A look that had never been directed at her. Maybe she had hoped for something like that from Elris. Maybe she had been a fool. She suddenly stopped in the hallway. Ed turned and asked what was wrong. Without knowing why, she blurted it out. She might not be able to pay him the 20 gold coins she promised. Things hadn't gone the way she planned. She regretted saying it immediately. He was the only person still helping her, and she'd just admitted she had nothing to offer. But Ed didn't seem bothered. He said he didn't care about the money. Then he grabbed her arm and pulled her along. They could talk about it later. Right now, they needed to avoid getting caught. Confused, she followed, trying to keep up. As they ran, Ed asked her to explain the situation. She told him there was a market manipulation scheme happening within the Elt Company's main branch. Her adoptive father was behind it. After a major monster clearing operation in the Eastern Mountains, the value of armour and equipment had plummeted. Her father planned to buy out the supply and monopolise it, then bounce the goods around internally to inflate their value. A classic insider trade. To fund the operation, he needed something big, like the Sage's sealed tome. That's why he sent her to the academy. He wanted her to find a way to seize it. Ed pieced the rest together. She'd escalated the Ophelis Hall occupation to drive the academy into financial distress, forcing them to sell the book cheap. With Elta distracted and pulled away from the main branch, she'd have just enough room to collapse the scheme from within. Lortel was stunned. How could Ed understand it all so quickly? If that was her plan, then there was one thing left to do. Send the order to Cell. Get word to her allies at the branch and crash the whole operation. She said she had a carrier pigeon in her room. That was how she'd been relaying instructions. Ed asked if a simple note would do, something like, Cell? She nodded. That was enough. But now her father was trying to capture her. If he got to her first, he'd force her to reveal everything. Ed told her to listen carefully. She needed to get somewhere safe, somewhere no one would see her. If he were her father, he'd have people stationed at both bridges off Akan Island. She had to find a stable hand and send out a decoy carriage to draw attention away. She asked what she should do afterward. Ed told her there was a cabin in the northern forest. He'd been building it himself. She could lay low there for a few days. Ed peered through a gap in the nearby door. Someone was standing just outside, watching the back exit. He quickly pulled Lortel to the sides and gripped her shoulders. He'd deal with the guard and get to her room to send the message. She needed to run, now. Keep out of sight and don't stop until she reached the forest. But Lortel froze. Could she really trust him? What was his angle? Ed tried to shake her out of it. Was she even listening? She finally snapped back and asked why he was doing all this for her. He looked at her. He saw the hesitation, the fear. Closing his eyes, he let out a breath. Did he really need a reason? He said he just felt like it. Then he turned and stepped through the door. Lortel leaned against the wall and slid down to the floor. Somewhere nearby, a loud noise rang out. Was it the clash with Elris upstairs? Or the fighting near the main entrance? No, it was close. She placed a hand over her chest. Her heart was racing. Ed stepped out into the rain. Just beyond the rear exit stood the maid, sword in hand. She hadn't expected him. She charged at him with her blade aimed low. Ed stomped down, catching her sword underfoot, stopping the strike cold. The same move as always. He remembered the pattern well. She quickly lifted her dress, revealing a belt of throwing knives. With one hand still gripping her sword, she tried to reach for them, but he grabbed her wrist, locking both arms. Then she used her trump card, Skillshare. Just once a day, she could borrow her twin's ability. The knives rose into the air under weak telekinesis and flew toward Ed. Two struck him. One in the side, one near the shoulder, but they didn't pierce deep. He pulled them free with one hand and shoved her to the ground. Pinned and furious, she screamed that she couldn't fail Elris. Ed told her it was over. She looked up over her shoulder and said he didn't understand what Elris meant to her, what they'd survived, the orphans they'd saved. Then a sudden boom shook the building. The fifth-floor windows shattered behind him. He pressed down on the maid until she passed out. Her last words before going still were that she would never forgive him. He stood up and pulled her from the rain, then dragged her back inside. There were countless stories that never got told in the game. But he had one now. One about survival. Bleeding from the fight, Ed stumbled away from the building. The wounds weren't deep, but each step still hurt. He didn't stop. A system alert. New skill acquired. Pain endurance. He could now ignore pain and fatigue temporarily. He reached the side of the hall, picked up a rock, and smashed open the window to Lortel's room. Climbing inside, he paused. It suited her. Quietly elegant. He crossed to the cabinet and opened it. The carrier pigeon was still there, waiting. He scribbled the note, Cell, and tied it to the bird's leg, then opened the window again and let it go, watching it fly into the storm. The plan was now in motion. Ed left Lortel's room and made his way back toward the forest camp. The rain had let up, and blood still seeped from the knife wounds in his side and shoulder. He staggered down the trail. His body felt heavy. Thanks to Ziggs and Yenneker, Lortel had escaped. If everything had gone according to plan, she'd already be waiting at the cabin. Through the trees ahead, he spotted someone on the path, a hooded figure standing still. As he approached, the figure stepped into view. It was Lortel. He started to ask why she was out here, then noticed the knife in her hand. His mind snapped into focus. This was the perfect spot. Isolated, quiet. The golden daughter herself, staring right at the one loose end she couldn't buy off. His heart pounded. She walked toward him, slow and steady. He panicked and thought about running, but his body was done. She raised the blade, then stopped right in front of him. Ed braced himself for a strike, but it didn't come. Instead, she reached out, cut strips of fabric from her own coat, and began wrapping his wounds. He watched in silence, barely able to react. She asked if he really had to get this hurt. She slipped his arm over her shoulder and supported him as they made their way down the trail. She mentioned starting a fire at the camp. Then she told him he should warm up. Then they headed back together.